you guys want to take your jewelry making to the next level, try this soldered cabochon ring. Okay guys, so we're going to be soldering a ring today. This is kind of a, I'm going to call it rudimentary type way to set a cabochon into a sterling silver ring. It's basically like setting 101, like the very first time you ever set a stone. It's here's one I've done. I did this one before, just so you can kind of see where we're going. This is a soldered ring, and you can see that I've just made some prongs here, and that's what's holding the piece in. I'm going to show you how to make the back and the prongs, and then also solder a ring band onto it. It's going to be a lot of fun, but it's definitely not a beginner's project, so you might want to try one of my other projects before you try this. Okay, now to get started, you're going to need all your basic soldering supplies. I have everything here. Of course, we're going to start with our torch. This is our butane torch that we're going to be working with that is hot enough to melt a sterling silver wire and the solder paste. You're going to need your fireproof surface. I've got 2 soldering blocks here, and I also have a charcoal block. Now, the reason I have a charcoal block is because some soldering blocks will act as what I call a heat sink, and that will suck the heat away from your piece. We need to make sure that doesn't happen, and charcoal doesn't do that. It's also fireproof, so that's why we have that. This is my third hand. That's what I use to hold onto metal so I don't burn myself. And then we're going to use solder paste today. Now, solder paste is a great way for those of you who have never soldered before to get started soldering. And it's kind of nice on this project because it kind of holds everything together while you're soldering. And we're going to use a solder pick to pick up our solder paste. And of course, we're going to have our safety glasses while we're working. Now, as far as cleaning up our metal is concerned, I do have over here a pickle pot. Inside that pot is warm water and something called pickle. This is a Sparex pickle right here. It's just an acid that cleans your metal after you solder it. I also have a quench bowl here full of just clear plain water. I have some butane just in case my torch runs out. And I have something called flux. And flux is what helps solder flow. And I've done a lot of videos on that, so if you don't know what that is, you might want to go back and look at that. But basically, flux equals flow. It's what makes sure that your solder actually flows into that joint and onto your metal to hold all the piece together. Very important in soldering. Also keeps your metal clean while you're working. Now, as far as this particular project is concerned, you're going to need a cabochon. I like kind of these elongated cabochons to do this project, because you really only need 4 prongs to hold them in because they're a little bit more narrow at each end. So I've got a really cool piece of aquamarine here, really neat piece of charoite, or a really nice labradorite cabochon. So I've got all those things right there. Then I am also going to have, this is the ring band that I'm going to use. I'm repurposing this ring band. You need to have a wider band to do something like this, and this is just a piece of sheet metal that I had already formed into a ring shape. And so I'm just going to reuse that to solder onto the back so that it holds my ring steady on my finger. And then you're going to need some 14 gauge sterling silver wire to make the back and also to make the prongs. And then as far as basic tools are concerned, flush cutter to cut your wire, chain nose, and a flat nose plier to form your wire. And that should be just about everything. So today we're making, I call them Huggie rings. Essentially, it's just a way to set a stone or a cabochon into a ring. That's really, really easy for those of you just getting started setting jewelry. I've actually taken a lot of classes on setting stones, and it can get really kind of complicated to make a basket setting. So this is just like the basics, like just the facts, right? And what you can see if you look at my piece right here, I've got a band, which is my ring, and then I have a little, almost just like a little shaped ring at the back, and that's what your cabochon is going to sit on. And then the prongs come around the sides and then just fold over the top of the stone to hold it in place. Really easy. I'm actually wearing a pendant right here that I've done exactly the same way. If I turn it around, you can see really easily on the pendant that little piece right there. So this is just kind of almost like a little just a piece for your pendant or your ring to sit on, and then you can see coming around the sides on the pendant, those are your prongs that hold it into place. And the reason I call them Huggie pendants is just because it kind of looks like, you know, with the pendant especially, it looks like it's holding onto it and hugging it, and with the ring, you know, the prongs are just kind of coming around and hugging or holding the piece in place. So anyway, step number one is going to be choosing a cabochon. I didn't want to pick one that was too big or too small for this project. You want a nice sized stone because you want people to notice the stone. They're not going to see the setting, they're going to see the stone. So I picked this piece of aquamarine, partially because I think it's really cool that I found in a cabochon parcel a 40 karat aquamarine. So that's gonna fit really well like on your pointer finger or your middle finger or for a nice big old right hand ring. Then what you're gonna do is you're gonna make the piece that sits behind the ring. So I've already started this using one of my pliers here, one of my bail shaping pliers. You can see how I've already formed it into a U shape. And then I've kind of straightened it out along the sides. I'm gonna form a U shape on the other side and make just a little ring to match the shape of my cabochon. And that's gonna be the start of essentially my setting. Okay, so I had left out one of the tools that I do like to use to make this project. This is called a wrap and tap plier. It's essentially just a large bail shaping plier that allowed me, you can see as you're looking at that one at the end that I use that to form that U shape. So I'm just going to kind of eyeball this and get this guy rounded. And I'm working from my spool. I know that's a little bit complicated, but I hate to waste sterling silver wire. I am just gonna start forming that. Let's see how I'm doing here. Yeah, that's gonna set up just perfect and fit right inside there. So now that I've got this going, I'm just gonna kind of manipulate it a little bit with my fingers and also with my flat nose plier to get that to match the other side. Let's see how I'm doing here. Pretty good. Okay, so the key is to keep all of the metal behind the ring or behind the stone, and but then have it close enough to the edges so that your prongs just kind of slip up and around the edge of your ring. So I've already got that side flush cut, so I'm just going to take my flush cutter on the other side and I'm going to clip that right here, and you can see I've basically wasted zero metal. I have lots more. You could make a lot of them out of this 14 gauge. All right, and so then this next step is just to kind of bring this together so I can solder it. And I flush cut it. You can, if you want to, take a file and just kind of file that flat. But I think I did pretty good. My flush cutter is a pretty good flush cutter, so I think that's gonna be just perfect. And then just kind of work it back and forth until they basically look like that joint is going to almost be like one continuous piece of metal. You should still be able to see where the joint is, but you don't want to see like a little ridge of metal on either side. All right, there we go. So I think I did that. See how it just looks like one continuous loop of metal? Doesn't have to be absolutely perfect, but that's a pretty good little shape to fit on the back. So, and I don't know if you guys noticed, but I did put the joint kind of offset on the side of this piece. And that's because we're gonna have several solder joins in this piece. And as you're working, as you're soldering, every time you heat the piece up, you're gonna obviously heat up those solder joints. And so you run the risk of one of the solder joints coming open while you're working on one of the other solder joints. So what I did was I offset it so it's not gonna be in the same place as someplace else that I'm gonna solder. The cool thing about solder, and a lot of people don't know this, is the more times you heat it, the harder it gets. And so the longer it takes for it to actually flow. So that's good. And so as you're working with this, the old joints should be less likely to open up. Now I'm going to be using a number 65 solder paste today, which is a soft solder. If I was doing more joins than I'm doing today, I probably would move up for my first joins and do like a 70 solder paste on the first one and then a 65 on the next one. But today this is just what I have, and I know it's what a lot of you guys have too. So we're going to make it work that way. Just rest assured and feel confident in the fact that solder, each joint will harden up as you work. And so it's going to be less likely to come apart. Now, could they all come apart? Yes. And that's why this is not a beginner solder project. You have to be a little bit more careful, but we're going to play it by ear here and get moving and start with our very first solder joint. So first thing is I've obviously made my little piece to go on the bottom of my aquamarine cabochon. So I'm going to go ahead and put that into my third hand and get ready just to solder that little join right there. So I'm going to put a little bit of my solder paste right here on the side and down to the left so it's out of the way of my flame. So what I'm going to do is just get a little bit of solder paste onto my solder pick just to get myself started there. And I know I've told you guys this before, but I always go ahead and get a little solder paste onto my pick before I start soldering, just so that I don't have to heat the joint up and then go find my solder paste and then come back to it. And we're also going to be using our spray flux to flux the entire piece to keep it clean and to help that solder flow really quickly, as opposed to after a very long period of time. Okay, so safety glasses, please. Pop those babies on. They're so attractive. So here's your torch. Just one more time, go over kind of the anatomy of the torch. Remember, right here is going to be your safety. This is going to be your on and off button. This is going to be your continuous flame button. And this is going to be your high-low. Now, pretty much when you're soldering sterling silver, which has one of the highest melting points of any metal, you're going to want to have this on high. But just in case, you know, you want to know where that is. And then to turn it off, this is your on-off button as well. Okay, so I'm just going to go ahead and turn my torch on, pull on the continuous flame, and turn everything up. And I'm going to start heating my piece. And you can see I'm working at the very tip of that flame, which is going to be the hottest point of the flame. And then I'm just going to start flexing my piece, and I'm looking for that little powdered sugar look here to get all over. I'm not getting it right there on the edge, all over my piece before I start. So flux first, then solder. So I'm going to go ahead and flux this, and now I'm going to get all things that might melt out of my way. And now I'm going to start heating the piece. Now I'm not using my charcoal block right now, and I'm wishing I hadn't put it down, but I did. So you can see it's got a lot of flux on it, which is okay. I just, I don't like to do that. Now, what I'm looking for on my piece is for that solder paste to go clear. And when it does, I know I'm ready to solder. So I'm just going to take a little bit of solder paste there, pop it on, and let it flow. And that worked just perfectly. Smaller pieces are a lot easier to solder than larger pieces, just because it heats up faster and the solder flows faster. So now that I'm done with that, I'm going to take this out of the third hand, and I'm going to drop it into my little quench bowl. And then from there, I'm going to put this into my pickle. Now, one of the things we're going to do today, because we have several solder joints, is we're actually going to pickle or clean our metal between every single soldering project or soldering part of the project. So what I just did was I popped that in there. We're going to clean it. And the reason is because when you solder, one of the things that you can learn the hard way, or you can learn it now, is that when you have dirty metal, it's a lot harder to solder. Now, have I made dirty metal solder before? Yes. However, technically speaking, when you have dirty metal, it just won't solder very well. Like solder will go everywhere, but it won't go right in that joint, and it's just because it's probably dirty. So if you clean your metal, if you file it or you pickle it between all the little solder joints, you're going to have a lot better luck soldering your piece. And that's something that you learn, and you're like, I've been sitting there like, well, I want this solder, I don't know what's wrong with this piece. And then you finally realize, oh, I need to clean it. So there we go. All right, so I'm going to turn this over to the other side, like so, because this next joint's going to be interesting to do. So next thing I want to do, usually like when I do a pendant, the next step is going to be to put these prongs on right here. But because I have got to solder this ring band on here, I'm going to go ahead and solder the ring band on first, because it's towards the middle of the piece, and then the prongs last because they're towards the edge of the piece. And I feel like I'm going to have to use a lot more heat to solder this on than I am going to have to use to solder the prongs on my piece. So what I don't want to do is overheat my piece while I'm putting those little prongs on while I'm putting this on. So this is the big piece, so we're going to do big first, little second. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and take this out of the pickle. Now remember, a pickle is acid, so always put your piece into some clear water and clean it off before you pick it up with your hands. And also remember, always take everything out of the pickle with a copper tong, because you don't want to contaminate your pickle, which basically means get some other metals in there that can then discolor your pieces. And like stainless steel, if you put stainless steel in your pickle, you might as well just consider it contaminated, because it is. All right, so that was a pretty good joint. If you had any trouble with your joint, like if you see like, oh, there's a big solder blob or anything like that, you can take your rotary tool right at this point and clean it off. with, like I use my jewel tool and clean that off, or you can also use any type of rotary tool, or you can just take a flat file and just get off anything extra. All right, so now what we're gonna do is just check this piece and make sure that we feel good about the shape. I think I can make it just a little bit more even. So I'm just gonna manipulate it just a little bit with my flat nose plier here on this side, and then pull it out just a little bit on this side so that it's closer to the same on both sides. Yeah, that looks good. It's not gonna be perfect, guys. This is, you know, doesn't have to be perfect, but that's pretty good. So that way, when we pop this under here, your prongs are not too far from the edge of your stone. So now, nice clean metal. I'm gonna use my brass brush here just to kind of clean that off really, really well. And now it is ready for the next soldering joint. Okay, so I'm gonna put this right here, right in the center of my charcoal block. Remember I told you why we're using a charcoal block, because it's not a heat sink. And then this is gonna be the ring band that I'm using. This, and you can see I've already filed the top down, and I did that on purpose because I wanted kind of a flat space. So if you see, I can put this down onto my charcoal block and see how it's gonna sit up like that. Did that on purpose. Now none of that's gonna be seen because my cabochon's gonna cover it, but for my purposes, it's gonna make it a lot easier for me to solder it to this band. So I'm just gonna put that in the center right there, and that's where this is gonna sit. So in order to do this though, I have to get a little solder paste in place. So I'm going to grab the solder paste, and I'm gonna do one side at a time, starting with the side where I do not have a join. Remember what I told you about solder getting harder as you go. So I'm just gonna pop a little bit of solder paste right here. And that might be just a little bit much, but I think I'll take a little bit out of there. Like I said, a little bit goes a long way. So don't go crazy, but just get it right there in the center. And then you're gonna put your ring down. And one of the reasons I like using solder paste for this is because it almost acts kind of like a paste, holding things together for you. So I'm just gonna pop that in there and make sure that the two pieces of silver touch each other and that they're right in the center. And that the solder join is right where I want it. And it looks good, it's together. Now, what you have to understand is that as I heat this piece up, I'm gonna flux the whole thing, and that solder is gonna need to flow from between the joint and up onto the ring band and down onto this little almost bezel type shape piece that I made. Make sense? So remember, we're just doing one side of the band first, and I believe we got the camera angle so you guys can essentially see what I'm doing. But just remember, it's just like any solder joint. You're basically just trying to get that solder to flow between the joint, and you have the solder is basically between the two pieces of metal, and the two pieces of metal are flat and flush up against each other, so that, like I said, solder follows heat. So if I heat both evenly, the solder should evenly flow between the two pieces of metal. So turn your piece on. I've already got the solder in there, and make sure it's high. Make sure you're working with the tip of that flame. You got your safety glasses on. I'm going to start heating and fluxing. And it's really important to flux at this point, guys, because we're going to get quite a bit of heat in this piece. So we want to make sure to keep our metal as clean as possible. So you see, same thing. I see it's like powdered sugar, right? So now I'm just going to start heating around the piece, especially on this band, because that's the bigger piece of metal. But you want to make sure you try to evenly heat both pieces. And I'm really concentrating the heat in that area right now. And I see it flowing, it's smoothly flowed. And I believe we've got it. And we'll know. I'll use this. Something besides my hand. Okay, perfect. So see how that flowed right there? It's holding that piece together. Now all I have to do is turn it around and do the other side. And once again, you're gonna take this, you're gonna quench it first, and then you're gonna take it and put it into your pickle pot and clean it up. All right, so that's been pickling for about 5 minutes. Remember, this pickle pot is hot, so it will pickle a lot faster than it would if it was cold. You can pickle in cold water, but it's gonna take a few hours. So I like to do it in a nice hot pickle pot. Remember, reach in with your copper tongs, pull that out. Everything should be nice and silvery. No black spots or brown spots or pink spots or anything on it. Clean it off in your clear water before you touch it, and then just get any excess off of your piece here with your brass brush. So now we're gonna actually solder right here on the other side next. You can see this side is joined, so I can pull on that, but this side is not joined. If I pull it up, it's obviously gonna come open. So I'm gonna take this piece, get a little bit of solder, and it's a little much, and just pop it right into that joint. Now you don't have to use solder paste, guys. There are obviously, you can actually use a different kind of solder. You can use any type of solder that you want to do this next project. It would be a little easier for me to do this with a chip of solder on this side. Oh, I got it in there, perfect. But like I said, solder paste is a really easy way to get started soldering. If it's all you have, it's absolutely perfect for this project. When I first started soldering, I honestly never used anything but solder paste for about 3 years. Then I finally got up the courage to switch over to something that didn't have the flux in the mix, and found a lot of different ways to do things that I really love. But I don't want you guys to feel like you can't continue to use the solder paste if you want to. Okay, so I'm just gonna set this back up right here. And we're doing the exact same thing we did last time, just now we're soldering the other side of the band to that ring that we made that's gonna sit behind our stone. All right, so we are set up and ready to do the other side. Remember, I've got my charcoal block, which is not a heat sink. I'm gonna spray flux this again, heat more on the band because it's a bigger piece of metal, and less on that bottom little ring that I have there, and then get that solder to flow into that join. So same thing, turn your torch on, bring on the continuous flame, start heating. And you're gonna flux first. So I'm not really heating right now, I'm really just fluxing. So see, I'm not really even using the whole flame. I'm not using the tip of it because I'm just getting the flux on. And once you get it all fluxed, let me make sure I got enough down there underneath where my piece is. Now I'm gonna start heating the piece. So I'm starting with the band because it's the heavier piece, then going around the outside. And just kind of watching for that flux to start going clear. And then when I see it starting to heat up the way I want it to, I'm gonna bring and start concentrating my heat right down here at that joint. And once it flows, perfect. Turn it off, pick it up, make sure it's, yes, it has flowed. Everything looks good on both sides. Now we're going to quench it in our quench bowl. You really heard it sizzle that time, didn't you? Let me pull this up underneath the camera. Can you see how almost yellowy and black that is? That's going to be your fire scale, and that's what we're trying to get off in the pickle. So, and we have to do that every single time between every single solder joint. So back into the pickle it goes. Boom, 5 more minutes. All right, so we are ready to pull this baby out of the pickle again. You know, I know it seems like it's time consuming to do all the pickling, but it's totally worth it because it's very frustrating to try to solder when it doesn't work, and it makes you feel like you're doing something wrong, which you absolutely aren't. It's just a dirty piece of metal, but it's a lot better, and it may be like a practice in patience to do all the pickling. All right, so we're just cleaning that off with that brass brush again, getting any last little bits of anything off of there. And now we are ready. Just check your joins, make sure they're joined on both sides, and they are. So now what we're ready to do is add our prongs. So we're gonna set this up again, just like so. Make sure this is gonna sit flat on my piece. And then I've already pre-cut my prongs. The prongs, of course, are the things that are gonna hold everything together and keep your stone on your ring. And so I already pre-cut them at 7/8 of an inch, and I always cut more than I need because you can trim them down. And then I just used my flat file to file the ends. If you really want to be kind of exact on this, you can take a flat nose plier like this on your flat file, and you can just use it. I usually use an old Huggie. I wouldn't use this one really hard, but an old Huggie flat nose plier to do that. You can also use something called a miter vise to get a really good flush flat edge on there. It's just another option for you. So I've already pre-cut and filed my prongs, and I'm just gonna take those and I'm just gonna place them up against the piece like this. Now I'm gonna get my solder paste on there first. and kind of use that to paste it together. So, and you just want to try to, as evenly as possible, because this is a perfectly shaped cabochon, place your prongs on your piece. And one of the things I like about using irregular stones is it doesn't matter if you're perfect, and this is not an irregular stone, so we're going to do the best we can. All right, so got a little solder paste there, and let's pop this into its little spot, like so. Next, get a little solder paste. Okay, so there's the next one, and then one more. And you may not be able to get all 4 of these done in one sitting, just because I can see that my metal is just sitting up just a little bit higher on this side just from all the heating. And if that's the case, just go ahead and get 2 and then get the other 2. That looks pretty good. All right. So now at this point, I'm going to flux my piece. I'm just going to concentrate. I'm going to be very careful as I'm heating. I'm just going to be concentrating my heat right at those joints and on each side of the ring. I'm going to start over here and then go over to the other side. Basically the same process, just a little bit more delicate. But first I'm going to switch to my safety glasses. All right, so move everything out of the way that's possibly flammable. Sometimes forget to do that. You should always kind of take your time before you start soldering to make sure your area is clear. Because of the way I'm filming right now, sometimes it's a little harder, but I actually have my bench at home set up so that I always set things off to the left and right of me, so I never have to worry about my flux actually being, in the wrong spot, or my Sparex or my stones or anything. All right, so turn your torch on, and we're going to start heating and flexing first. So first step, of course, is always flux. So go for that powdered sugar look. And don't be heating your piece, you're just flexing it right now. And that's going to help keep it clean. And once you get that good and flexed, which we're going to do, and see that's kind of burning our flux off right there, we're just going to start heating those little joins right there. And I'm just going to start with this one. And once that flows, move to the next one. So just one. And then off to the next one. And then the last one. I'm just going to go back over them one more time just to make sure they all went. And I think they did. This one right here looks like it may be. One thing about solder, one thing about flux is it can get stuck. There we go. Oh, look, that one did solder. All right, so this has been pickling for about 10 minutes. It's our last pickle, so I left it in just a little bit longer. Make sure it got really nice and clean. Gonna clean that off in the clear water. And let's see how everything looks here. I thought I had one prong that was a little bit weird, but now that I'm looking at it, I think it might be just fine. Let's see. Oh yeah, that looks great. So basically what I'm looking for is, you see that join right there? See how nice and neat and clean that looks? And this one got just that's that very first join I made. I'm gonna have to do a little polishing right there to kind of polish that out. But there's no solder like bleeding down the joint. There's no solder bleeding down any of my prongs. They're set nicely on the edges of the piece, and they feel nice and solid. So that looks great. So essentially that is ready. It's not very pretty right now, but it's ready to make a ring. So I'm going to pull my jewel tool in. It's a rotary tool that cleans up your silver, and I'm going to polish this up before I set my stone in the piece, because it's a lot harder to polish it once you get that stone in there. But so you can see kind of what's about to happen. Cool, right? I'm going to pull in my jewel tool. Like I said, you can use any rotary tool that you want to do this part. If you have a little, Dremel style tool, anything like that, you can do that here. This is a tool that I have that I like. I feel like it's kind of brought all of my jewelry making up to the next level. It polishes and cleans your pieces, shapes, and forms your stones. It's kind of amazing, and it's also easy to use. It's got these little discs here on the top that you can actually see through as they turn, so it makes it really, really easy to find all those places that you need to clean up on your piece. Now, if this is one of your first pieces and you do have a lot of solder blobs, the best thing about this whole thing is that that stone is what everybody's gonna look at. So, you know, you might wanna go with something even more amazing looking, like this big piece of charite or a really bright stone if it's your very first piece. That way all they'll see is the pretty stone and they won't notice if you made any mistakes. So I am going to bring this up here and I'm basically polishing off where I had any little bits of, and I'll be able to get into that just a little bit better. Now I do have this turned to the side here. I'm just gonna move my prongs out of the way so I can get to that. And actually not to this, I have this facing you guys, so it's a little harder for me to get in here. But you can actually use the edge of this little guy right here. This one's called a magic eraser. And it really is kind of magic. It actually erases all my errors. So I'm just going to kind of clean up that join right there where I could see just a little bit of a line. And then I'm going to clean up the band as well. Okay, so now that everything looks fairly smooth, and I don't see any solder on any of the metal, I can polish this up. And I mean, yeah, I'll have to do a little bit more polishing after I get the stone in there because I was gonna get some tool marks and stuff, but that you can do that kind of almost as a, just like a touch up. Now there is a tool that polishes the inside of the ring that goes on the jewel tool, and I am gonna use that a little bit later because I'm gonna wanna polish the inside of my ring. I'm not gonna do that today. To get to the inside of the ring, you can use, like I've got some steel wool right here. You can kind of use a little steel wool to polish that up if you want to, and that's all I'm gonna do today. But if you're at home and you have that little piece, that attachment to your jewel tool, you can do that. And you know, most rotary tools actually have small little pieces. Just always make sure you pay attention to the finishing touches, like the insides of your pieces on your rings, and clean those up as well. So let's get our polishing piece out here and pop that on there. Make sure it's tight. Turn it on the side and add a little bit of polishing compound. And then what we're gonna do is just start polishing that up. You wanna pay attention to the outsides of your ring bands because those are the parts that you're gonna see. And then also any place that you use that magic eraser, you want to pay extra special attention to make sure that you get any scratch marks off the metal that you made. This tool really makes fast work of this, so you don't have to worry about spending like hours polishing your piece up. And now I'll just turn that off, and then the final step is to hit it with this other polisher, but I'm going to do that after I get my ring set because that won't hurt that stone at all. So move jewel tool to the side. Is that my little friend? Okay, so now, so final step here is to set your stone, and what you want to do is, I usually do it from the back like this so I can kind of see if I'm making it even. And I've still got stuff on my hands. I'm trying to get some of that off. But what we're gonna do then is kind of set this right in the center of this piece. And this is not gonna be exactly perfect. This is not meant to be a perfect piece. It's just meant to be beautiful and fun to wear. So I'm just gonna hold this and I'm gonna bend up my prongs on one side, and then down here on the other side. And the metal should be nice and malleable now because it's been heated so many times. And then you're just gonna kind of do the exact same thing on the other side. If you don't wanna do this with your fingers, you can actually start forming it with a flat nose plier. This is just kind of the way I like to do it, so. And this is also gonna test whether or not you did a good job soldering your piece, because if you didn't, one of these prongs will pop right off. All right, so try to get that right in the center, like so. and work your piece up. Let's see, how tight is that going to need to be? So that's going to need to be pretty tight. So I'm going to take my flat nose plier and bend these up just a little bit more. Now that I've got it started in the spots that I want. And then same thing up here. Just bend that up a little bit more. And the side up a little bit more. And this is just kind of a little bit of a labor of love, folks. You just got to kind of work with it until you get the prongs up tight against the edges of the piece and you don't have any of that metal showing in the back. So let's see kind of how I'm doing here. So see, that's looking pretty good right there. And it feels like it's gonna, I like the way the band is sitting, or that ridge is sitting back behind it, so it's not gonna show on the sides of the ring. And then I'm just gonna keep pushing, and I'm gonna push one over one way and one over the other way, like so, and then do the same thing down here at the bottom. So see what I did? I kind of crisscrossed them over my stone, like that. So now it's sort of kind of set in place. Now, if you wanted to, you could, like with a large stone like this, you could go with more prongs if you wanted to. You could go have double prongs on each side. You could go uneven prongs. You can go, you know, a lot of different ways. This is your design, so do it the way you want to. I tend to make mine real simple because I want to show off the stone, and I'm not really interested in showing off, you know, all my wire or metal work that I'm doing. So what I do is I just keep it really simple. So these are 16 gauge prongs, and I'm just gonna go ahead and trim these around the edges. If you're a super perfectionist and you feel good about the length of your prongs going up and around here, you can actually open this back up and you can trim them all exactly the same length and make sure you have exactly the same length prongs. I'm gonna eyeball it because you guys know I always eyeball it. And then I'll pull it back out and clean up my prongs. So I want to have just a little bit of metal coming up over the edge of the stone. So I'm going to clip it just right there. See how it just comes up over the ridge of the stone? If you have like a squared off edge, you've got to make sure you come up over that squared off edge or it'll pop right back out. With this, because it's rounded, you're just going to need like a few millimeters up and over the rounded part of the bend. So I'm just going to trim that one. And then this one, and then do the same thing on the other side. Trim it right up there, just up over that edge, and right over here, just up over that edge. So now you can kind of see my ring is almost already made. Wow. Okay, but you cannot leave like rough metal like that on a piece. So I am gonna pick these back up now that I've got it done, and I like my lengths. I'm going to pick them back up with my flat nose plier, straighten them out, and I'm going to clean up the edges. Okay, and so you can check the length of your prongs now, and like a lot of times what I like to do is put it down like this and see if it, you know, like table legs. That's one way to do it, and I can see I've got one that's just a little bit too long, but you can also measure them. You can use a ruler, or you can even use like a flexible piece of tape to measure those, make sure they're exactly the same length or close to the same length. And then, like I said, there's a couple different ways to do this. I was going to use my jewel tool, but I realized it's just going to be easier for you guys to use a cut burr or a wire rounder to do this, to round out the ends. So what this is, this little wire rounder, you guys may have seen this before. It's basically like a battery operated cut burr, and it's just got little teeth on the inside. It's like a little file that's rounded, and when I put this on here and turn it on, it's going to round out the ends of my prongs, and then I can finish it up on my jewel tool if I want to. So I'm just going to use this. A lot of rotary tools come with attachments like this too, so if you have a rotary tool at home, you probably have already seen one of these. So once you've got those nice and round and smooth, what you're going to do then is, of course, set your stone back in here and then bring your prongs back in, up and over your piece. I like to use a chain nose plier to get these little ends and kind of give them a little bit of a bend before I start pushing them over the stone. And that the reason is it just sets the stone a lot better. So just give a little bit of a bend like that, and same thing on this one. A little bit of a bend and a little bit of a bend, just like so. You can see already how that kind of is making a prettier, more professional looking piece. And then you just grab this with your flat nose plier and bring it up and just kind of almost butch it in like so. Same thing on the other side. Bring it up and butch it in. And you're going to do this a few times. Up, butch it in, just until it gets nice and tight. Up and butch it in. And you can press down as well with your flat nose plier. And then you want to make sure that there's no air between the tips of your prongs and your stone. And then you just want to even everybody out. Make sure you like the way they all look. I'm fairly happy with that. And so all I have to do now is polish up my ring and I'll be ready to wear it. So I'm just polishing my ring up now. I'm just going to put just a little bit of the polishing compound on there. I'm happy with how this looks from all angles, and I just want to make it nice and shiny. So I'm going to turn up my jewel tool and just use my polishing, my buffer here, and just buff up all the silver so it's a super shiny ring. And this should not hurt your stone. So I'm just going to go ahead and let it touch the stone where it wants to. I don't like to get polishing compound in there, so I'm not like pushing the stone into it, but I am, and I did get a little polishing compound on that rough spot on the cabochon, which makes me sad, but so be a little bit careful when you're doing this part. But make sure you get that ring all nice and shiny. All right. Once you get everything polished up like that, your ring is ready to wear. I'm going to switch out my rings, because why not? And this is a nice big ring. A lot of presents, and that's a 40-karat aquamarine that you set in a ring. So now you finished with your aquamarine ring or whatever stone you happen to put in there. We're going to go through some of these tools and supplies. Make sure you got everything you need. First of all, we were doing soldering. So we had our torch and our solder paste. We used a number 65 for the whole project. Pretty impressive. Then we also had our third hand, which is going to hold on to the piece while it's hot so that you don't burn yourself. And our fireproof surfaces. We had 2 soldering blocks and also this charcoal block, which I talked to you guys about how it does not act as a heat sink, and it makes it a lot easier to solder multiple joints. Don't forget your safety glasses, because you're going to have those. As far as the other types of tools and supplies, I used my pickle and my pickle pot right here to clean the metal. I also used some spray flux to keep the metal clean. This is just a little quench bowl that I used, and then of course I used my copper tongs to take things in and out of the pickle as I was working. I used my brass brush. It was part of my cleaning process, and then for shaping and forming my metal, I used a cupper or a wire rounder. I used my wrap and tap plier to shape the metal. I had my chain nose plier and my flat nose plier, always essential, and then also my flush cutter. Also, I used my flat file in the process of making this ring, and then for some reason my solder picks all the way down there at the end, but that's what we used to pick up the solder and solder the ring. We did use sterling silver wire to make the ring. The base of it, that actual setting was done with a 14 gauge wire. And then I already had a band made that I showed you guys at the beginning. It's really whatever band you want to use is great. I like to use a little thicker piece of metal to make my band, because on a big ring like that, you're going to want some presence in that band, and it makes it kind of hold better on your hand. Of course, I used my jewel tool today, the star of the show, to keep everything shiny and polished up. At the end, make sure I didn't leave any weird solder blobs on anything. And that's about everything I believe that I used here today. So I hope you guys have fun getting started with this project. Thanks so much for watching. If you guys would like to pick up some supplies like the ones we work with today, check out the links down below. We love to solder here. If you guys would like to see some different projects, please let us know in the comments what they are. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and ring that bell, and we'll see you again next time.